I never really had heard about any teen that had been pregnant. I do think that just with the programs that we already have here, just by adding in a few key points, we can really improve just the general knowledge about the topic here.
Well, after taking Hope, you kind of learn about, sex and that you should use protection and how you get diseases and, just all that kind of thing.
Well, the Hope class was supposed to be a health class, but only one of the sections was on sexual education. Being only one section, our education was pretty limited and brief. And what we did learn was, I feel like it was helpful, but only to a certain extent. And actually, I remember one specific incident from my Hope class was there was a survey between freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, and it was just a yes or no question, have you had sex before? And the results were actually really shocking to me freshman year. And it's roughly 50% for freshmen, 60 sophomore, 70 junior, 80 senior. So those are really high numbers, and I don't think administrators or teachers realize this, but teenagers are going to have sex like whether they like it or not, so they might as well teach kids how to practice it safely.
Minimal.
Can you run us through the one day, what did they tell you?
Well, they just told us about puberty, and then they mentioned that STDs existed and that abstinence was the way to go. They didn't tell any of the boys about female anatomy. They also, I want to talk about gay stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
sorry.
actually you.
Sorry, that's why I'm here.
A good position.
Yeah. Not only they ignored the fact that homosexuality is a factor, they didn't mention it, and I think a student brought it up as a question, and the other students just laughed and were like, oh, that's weird. So it wasn't taken seriously at all. And one of the questions was how to avoid getting STDs, and a girl raised her hand and she was like condoms, and then the teacher just paused for a moment, was abstinence.
Having that environment in school is always something I've wanted, because I feel like in school you should feel comfortable talking about stuff like that, and you should feel like you can talk to your teachers and peers about it. But I think the current way that we've gone about sex education, you don't feel comfortable talking about your teachers and peers about it, because there's such a strong stigma around it that no one wants to talk about it. It's really hush hush, off the table. Nobody acknowledges the fact that more than half of the students in this school have engaged in sexual intercourse. And I think that it should be acknowledged, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can still remain private. It's not something, you don't need to run around yelling that you've had sex, but it's nothing to be ashamed about, and it's nothing to, be hush-hush about, or anything that you can't ask someone about if you have questions.
I think it would help more because, my parents didn't talk to me about sex or sex education. Actually, no one did, no one from the family. School did, but they were just sort of okay, if you have sex and you don't wear condoms,
you're gonna get pregnant.
No. Yeah. And they would just say, okay, you could catch this, but they really didn't explain. They really didn't go into detail. So that's why I was oh,
and
nothing's gonna happen. So.
And that takes me back to the whole they keep it PG, and it's you can't do that when you're trying to talk about sexual education. Sex is sex.
So did you guys take Hope or anything, a health class?
Yeah, that's where we learned at home.
So does that how in depth does that go?
Not that much. They did show pictures,
drawings
of the genital areas. Really say, okay, if you have herpes, you will feel like this, or it will happen this. It will
and
stay
they don't
forever.
talk to us. I didn't know what ovulation was until after I got pregnant. I didn't know that you could only get pregnant when you were fertile, which is when you ovulate. Until I said, after I got pregnant. So that information came kind of late.
Yeah. I feel like they need to be teaching the kids at a younger age, because now these days and ages, like
It starts in middle school
it's
now.
yeah, like
Yeah.
maybe
Oh,
even
it's like
elementary. I feel like they
Maybe
should start
kindergarten.
teaching.
I know. There's,
They should start teaching sex education a lot earlier because things have changed since the 80s.
And that's the thing, like, I don't remember, in middle school, nobody ever, like, you don't think
Yeah.
about that in middle school. And there's a girl in middle school that I know who's pregnant with twins.